I'm Claudine Wong from KTVU, joining you from the San Francisco Bay Area. I have a great panel with us here today to talk about the very important bus industry that has been severely impacted by this pandemic. We've got Ken Presley, who is the United Motor Coach Association Vice President, Legislative and Regulatory Affairs and Industry Relations and COO. Vicki Cole, who is the CBA President and co-owner of American Stage Tours. We got Mike Waters, who's Service Delivery Director, Coach USA Megabus, also a past CBA president. We have Dan Eistrager, who is the CBA legislative consultant, also a past CBA president and former owner of All West Coach Lines, and Ginny Orr, who is the manager of Golden West Travel. So thank you all so much for having this discussion. I want to start off with Ken Presley, though, to give us kind of an idea for those who, yes, we know, motor coaches and buses are in our lives, but this is a really big industry that's integrated in ways that I think people may not realize.
Well, thank you, Claudine. The motor coach industry is part of the fabric of the passenger transportation across the country. If you're in the military, you certainly know that you move by motor coach, particularly when you're headed overseas. If you're going on a cruise, most people get to the cruise ship through a motor coach. If your fifth grade class is going on a field trip, you're doing it by a motor coach. And one of the reasons that we're kind of behind the scenes is that we're private companies. We do it without the benefit of government subsidies.
And so in terms of, I think you use the term unsung heroes. Is it one of those services, I think, that people have just relied on? They expect it to just be there. And so it doesn't necessarily, come to the top of their mind. It's just one of those things that maybe we have taken for granted a little bit.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And so in terms of, this business has been around for a lot of years. The buses have changed. The technology has changed. The comfort level, I will say, that has changed fairly dramatically. But Dan, you've been in the business for a long, long time. And in the history and when you talk about the health of the industry, before this pandemic hit, was the industry doing pretty well?
This industry, thank you, Claudine, for enabling us to come on and talk to you about the virus and what it's doing to our motor coach industry. Our industry was very strong. In fact, the industry has been performing quite well for the last 2 or 3 years. Some of the charters that are not being handled right now in the state of California because of the March 15 shutdown are all the schools, universities, the grad nights, and most companies will earn their revenue in the motor coach business between March and October. These are their big months. You've got companies that are having $1 million months from March in through October, and yet now their whole fleet is sitting in their yard. They're shut down.
I mean, in terms of this, couldn't be worse for you guys. I mean,
yes, it could not be worse.
Is bad, but the timing of when it started and everything, if people are mourning what has been canceled, it's the people on the bus.
And even right now, we've got word from companies that charters are being canceled through July and August now.
How many people do you guys carry as an industry?
Pardon me?
How many people are we talking about as an industry when you're talking about how many people you bring through? I've heard it's in the hundreds of millions, right?
Ken can answer that better.
600 million passengers annually, and that's served by 3,000 companies. And most of those are small family-owned companies spread throughout the United States, serving their communities.
So Dan, as these cancellations come through in terms of, unprecedented loss and how you even make it up, I mean, it doesn't, I don't think it gets made up.
You don't make it up. When they call in to cancel, if they have a deposit, you try to convince them to go ahead and rebook later on. But what's later on now for us? Is later on July? Is later on November? Is later on next year, 2021? The uncertainty of that is tremendous. A lot of companies have chosen to go ahead and give the deposit back to the customer. The customer in good faith gave it to us for the charter, for the movement. And in that respect, I think we're doing the right thing. But these companies have gone to their banks. They've had to go and say, hey, we can't make our payments now on our buses. These buses are anywhere from $550,000 to $600,000 a piece now. And for a company to carry that on their books every month with no revenue coming in, every bus sitting. It's just a disaster for us. So to try to make up that amount of money going forward is going to be very serious problems for most companies. We don't know how many companies are going to go out of business in California because of this, or through the nation.
And I think we'll see the chain of when you can't get a bus and you can't get, and you're trying to figure out why I can't get this service, that becomes difficult. And the when is such a big part. I know, Mike, you're talking about that in terms of, you know, you're in Nevada right now and you've got California doing one thing, Nevada doing another, Texas doing another. That kind of lack of a across the board
uniformity.
It does change things. I mean, we understand why they're doing it. Every state has different numbers. They all have different testing procedures. They all have different cases. They all have different ways to monitor. So that makes sense on the health perspective. But you're saying, I mean, even if Nevada says we're going back to business, if you can't get to California for some of these routes or some of these other states, it makes it hard to get back at all.
Well, certainly it does, Claudine. I mean, I think we, on our intercity bus side, under the megabus side of the company, we operate in 39 states. So, and we've got runs that operate, for example, from Dallas to Chicago and on to Minneapolis. So, you know, you've got quite a few states that you're going through there that, again, with a lack of uniformity, makes it uncertain of how we're going to start, number one, and then two, with the likely insistence on the social distancing. You know, you're now running a bus trying to, as we do, on an economical basis for the consumer. Now you're running a bus with probably a third or maybe a fourth of the available seats taken to try to have some kind of distancing in it. Just like the airlines are going to, you know, we're basically kind of an offshoot of the airlines because we've got the same confinement issues and the seat limitations, and then trying to continue on with, you know, hand sanitizing and mask wearing and that type of thing. So
and I imagine with that, you know, I think if you raise the, I mean, those seats are paid for individually, and I'm sure there's some math that goes into that to making sure that they have to pay X amount for the seat to make it that ride worth it. And the idea that you would charge more for a seat because there are empty ones around, that probably won't go over well with consumers. I mean, I think airlines are probably in the same position, right? We want to have the same seat. I don't want to have someone sitting next to me, but for the airlines, look at that. They look at that as a loss, as do you, in terms of dollars.
Oh, certainly. The economics change dramatically if you're trying to allow for distancing, you know, and again, in that confined space.
Yeah, that doesn't seem to work out. And Vicki, I know that you guys do specialized tours. You got the cruise ships and you got people coming off the airlines. Not only does it probably not make economical sense, but if you have a big cruise ship coming up, if those cruise ships get back in the water, and we know that might take a while, beyond the fact that if they don't get back, you know, in booking their ships and the airplanes aren't full, then it does have a trickle down effect. But beyond that, it would take a long time to get everyone off a cruise ship if you're only going to put, you know, a handful of people on a bus. So it gets complicated.
It does. And it's and then with our company, we're working the Western 11 states in Canada. So we have to watch what every state is going to do and abide by everybody's law. But yeah, the cruise ships, flying them across the world or the nation, it's going to be a hard one to come back from. And, you know, they're saying 18 to 24 months for us to get back to somewhat of normalcy, if whatever the new normal is going to be for us.
Right, and who knows what that looks like. But in terms of their health, the health of your industry and your business is dependent on these other industries getting healthy as well. I think that's probably, in terms of planning, if you were living in a bubble, right, where you could say, okay, here's all of us saying we're going to do this, and that's going to work out. If these other industries don't do well, that doesn't bode well for you guys, no matter what you do.
No, and it doesn't. You know, you've got your seniors, which are your most vulnerable, and they do a lot of bus travel, and so they're running scared right now. They don't want to get on a bus. You know, they don't want to be in a crowd. So it's going to be convincing them to come back to travel for a lot of places. And then you've got your schools, those field trips You know, they're not going to be putting 50 kids on a bus
Yeah.
to get off to a field trip. So it's good. It's going to be a long time for this industry to come back.
And that consumer confidence. And the question is how long we can wait. I mean, Jenny, you are fairly new to the industry in terms of in the last 5 years. And, you know, it's not just industry wide, it's individual. We talk about all of these family owned private companies and 100% of employees not working. I mean, what do you tell your employees?
We have to wait until our leaders decide how we're going to mitigate our risks. Life has risks. We can't stop living, and we have to move forward. And I understand this is not a popular thought process. We can't stay at home forever. We can't stay at home for months. And when we do go back, and if we don't have enough to pay the bills, we can't suspend our insurance and run the bus. So we have to bring our insurance back. We have to make our bus payments, but we're not getting enough to pay it. So we're still in deficit. And I don't, it's disheartening to work so hard to provide a quality service, to have it swept away in such a short time. Buses are maintained and cleaned nightly. A reputable bus company takes pride in their equipment, and they clean it and make sure it's safe for the passengers that they're transporting.
So I guess the question is now, you know, I mean, in terms of as an overall industry, what is happening in the short term and what is happening, you know, to be able to help? I mean, certainly the complications with people getting, you know, small business loans and help and independent operators and all of that, it's very complicated and confusing. So for all of you guys on the panel, I mean, and I think in the big organizations, I mean, if you have CBA and the United Motor Coach Association, I mean, you're the places that people are calling going, what should I do? And I don't know if anyone has great answers right now.
Well, it's time for Congress to step up and recognize this industry and recognize what it does for the country, and sit down with the industry and work out some long-term grants and loans so that we can survive until this crisis passes.
And what I'm getting from you is that you don't feel as an industry it's been recognized amongst, you know, the help packages that have been out?
Well, let me give you an example. I applied on March 19th for the economic injury disaster loan. It took me the better part of morning to night because the system was overloaded, and I still couldn't send everything. So I had to send some stuff separately. And no response. Thank you for your application, basically. And then I was sent an email saying we have a more streamlined application and we'll give you a $10,000 advance. Great, no problem. Filled it out. Then I got another email saying we are capping all loans to $1,000 per employee, up to a maximum of $10,000. $1,000 doesn't cover the insurance on one bus for 1 month. So that's not realistic help. And there's been no offers or follow-up with actual economic industry disaster loan.
Yep. How many members are in your organizations, in the United Motor Coach organization? How many people are members of that?
Well, there's 3,000 motor coach companies in the United States.
And yeah. And Vicki, in terms of CBAs, how many members are we talking about there?
68.
Oh, 68. Okay. So, I mean, I know you guys were saying, you know, you don't know how many will exist after we get through the end of this very dark tunnel. How much time does anyone really have to play around with? I mean, the overhead of these buses, you know.
I'm negative. I can't. I'm done. I have deferred my payments for 3 months. After that, I don't know what I'm going to do. The picture behind me isn't paid for. It has a loan, and that loan is expensive. And it's like buying a house, a bad house in California, but you only get 5 years to pay it off.
And so, you know, is that a fairly typical thing? If you can defer these payments, then people maybe have a couple months under their belt, but if nothing comes back, then
well, again, If we're going to run the bus, we can't defer the payments, we can't defer the insurance, and it's not going to make enough to cover them. So we're going to be operating in a hole for months, if not years.
Dan, can you compare this to anything in your experience in this industry that you guys have been through? I mean, certainly we've been through a lot of tough times. I don't know if anyone can make a comparison to what we're going through now.
There is nothing to compare it to because our industry has never shut down. We have been there through earthquakes, through floods. We're the companies that move people out of dangerous situations. We bring in rescue people. This just shut down. It shut the businesses down overnight. People got so scared. Cancellations came in by the thousands. And I don't see it coming out very quickly at all due to the fact that there's such a fear out there that there is not an inoculation. There's not a resource out there in a big enough quantity to be able to squash. I know Governor Newsom yesterday at noon is saying, well, some things can happen maybe in a couple of weeks, you know, phase 2 maybe, but then look at phase 4, which where our big group, we go to Disneyland, we go to these, take a lot of people to different, the ships, to this, that, and the other thing. That's stage 4. That's going to be maybe the spring of 2021.
Yeah.
So bus companies, they may have 6 months or 90 days now reprieve on their bus payments, insurance, and other types of direct payments that they have to make. But what's going to happen in July? They have no revenue coming in. They can't make it. So are these institutions going to allow that to slide even further into 2021? I'm not real sure. We've gone to the agencies in the state of California to get some deferment on vehicle licensing or credits for, or move it out 6 additional months, maybe even more. We're working on that daily with the staff of Governor Newsom to be able to help our members do that. But I don't see companies surviving with good revenue like we have up till March 15th or the end of February until the beginning of March of 2021, possibly. It's devastating.
It's a long time off,
and that's companies that can't stand this. They're going to go into bankruptcy or they're going out of business.
And you have to realize that we're self-employed, many of us, so we don't qualify for unemployment. So now the new thing that says, oh yes, we can qualify for unemployment, it's $167 a week. That's not going to help.
Yeah, there are certainly in terms of making numbers add up, a lot of numbers across the board
Right.
are not
There's
adding
a lot
up
of gaps.
so many folks. Vicki, is there you talked about specialized tours being with the cruise ships and the airlines. Is there a of maybe how business has been done and how it can be done differently to serve those areas? Or it seems kind of a straightforward approach to someone comes off a ship and they need transportation. Is there, when you're looking at that, is there a way to reimagine the industry?
Well, the way they're talking about with social distancing, it's going to need a lot more coaches to transport people, because our 56 passenger bus, they're stating with the social distancing, only going to hold 12 or 13 people. So like when we have a marching band that takes our 56 passengers and they use 7 buses, they're now going to have to take 35 buses to keep those kids social distanced. So with the cruise lines, it's going to be the same way. They fill the coaches, and you're not going to have that many coaches available to get everybody transported to where they're going.
And the cost, a greater need with fewer companies and fewer people.
And you can't afford to run 35 buses.
Yeah, and no one, and I don't,
for one group. There's
a reason that schools carpool sometimes, and it's because they can't afford to get the bus, because the bus is more expensive than making parents drive those kids. Mike, I think about, because you're in Nevada too, and a place like Las Vegas in that area too, where a lot of people, there's no parking for the tourists on the strip anyway, and
no.
They don't want people they want people in buses. If we go to the just travel together and not everyone drive individual cars, that they are pushing for that, and how you make that work. Do you see the need coming back and more people pushing for it in a place like Nevada versus California? Do you see some states maybe where people are going to be centering their lines, if we're talking about interstate travel or just trying to stay in a state to make some kind of model work?
Well, I kind of look at the approach that JetBlue took the other day, requiring passengers to wear masks as well as the flight attendants for their own safety. I think, in my opinion, those are the ways we're going to get back to operating somewhat similar to normal. The difficulty with the buses, California Bus Association members, who are primarily charter bus operators, again, as we talked earlier on, this couldn't have happened at a worse time. We shut down at the peak, just at the start of our season, which will run through the end of October. And those trips that have canceled will not rebook under the best circumstances until next year. So we've at least lost 6 months of the life of the business, assuming that when school starts up again, if it does in September, that we may have a chance to get some start back to normal again. But it's going to take people to feel that they're safe, wearing a mask in close proximity, and again, this emphasis on hand washing, and some faith in people that that we can get through this. But locking ourselves up at home for another 6 months is not an option.
It's going to be hard. I mean, I think, Ken, in terms of overall and the members, of the United Motor Coach Association too. I mean, there's got to be some changes, not only for the passengers to feel comfortable and feel like they want to be able to, or even the schools saying, okay, yeah, I got to tell my parents, because it all goes down the line, right? Do I feel comfortable? Can I convince the parents that they should be comfortable? And also, we shouldn't forget about the drivers. I mean, we talk about frontline workers too, and the drivers who have to welcome people on multiple bus trips too, in terms of this national perspective, Ken, in terms of where you think this, can you speak to that at all in terms of just building this industry back up and making sure that everyone feels okay moving forward?
Well, I was just in a meeting discussing that as how we protect the driver and make sure that we have a maximum protection for the driver, because we certainly don't want those guys getting sick. And then long term, I think we're entering a new era of actually disinfecting our buses, maybe with these commercial foggers and what have you. So we're definitely turning a new corner.
Yeah, I think that's the question, how we reimagine. There's no going back to the way we were, regardless of whatever happens next. I don't think that normal will be a new normal.
Yeah.
As they call it, because for our safety, for our the employee safety, and really for everyone's consumer confidence, that's the big issue, making people feel comfortable getting back on your buses, taking that ride, because that's always been like the relaxing place, and they want to be there, and they appreciate the services. And I am so sorry that all of you guys and that your industry as a whole are suffering, so
I do want to say, Claudine, sorry to interrupt,
No, go ahead.
because it sounds like we're wrapping up here. I do want to say there is no way to make everybody, quote unquote, feel safe. You can't do it. Somebody will always feel somebody didn't do enough.
Yeah, I mean, I get what you're saying. I mean, we hear it from gym owners, we hear it from hair salons, we hear it from a lot of these small, nail salons. They're doing everything they can, but their business does depend on people feeling at least a level of confidence where they can
Sure.
get on board, and they can feel that as long as that takes, and the longer it takes, with a brick and mortar store, we see it boarded up and closed down and a closed sign. With your guys' industry, we just walk outside and realize that there's no bus there to pick us up or drive us, and sometimes the heartache and the struggles that you're seeing are not as readily seen to the folks around them. So I certainly hope this discussion did shine the light on that, in whatever way we can, as we continue to try to move forward together in this. So Ken, Vicki, Mike, Dan, Jenny, I really appreciate your time. My thoughts
Thank
are
you.
with you as we try to navigate this, and I hope the better comes sooner than later.
Yeah. Amen to that.
Thank you for taking the time to meet with us.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Claudine.
Thank you.
Absolutely. And for more interviews, you can always go to coronavirusnow.com.